design at the end of the day is connection. And you're conveying information, you're conveying an experience, and having that connection severed, I feel can have dire consequences. Like I said, varying levels of severity based on what we're designing.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Pixelated Perfect. I am really excited today. I have a very special guest. This is Justin. Justin, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, great to be here, Diane.
Yeah, so I wanted to give a quick intro and kind of give everyone a little tidbit of what we'll be talking about today. So Justin is an internationally recognized design leader, author, and speaker. He resides in Chicago. He has over 25 years experience. He gives unique perspectives on the evolution of design and impact of design on company culture, which is really exciting. I'm really excited to dive deeper into that. He's recently launched Anomaly, which is a design and design leadership company. And he also wrote a book, which is coming out on June 27th, and it's called In Fulfilment, The Designer's Journey. So yes, let's jump in. Thank you so much. Let's just hop right into it. So Justin, the first question I have for you, which is something I usually ask a lot of my podcast guests, is when did design come into your life? When was that moment or compilation of moments where you were like, design is me. It's where I see my career going. It's who I am.
Yeah, I can pin that to a very specific moment, actually. So my mom was a fine artist, so illustrations, painting. So I was always kind of surrounded by art, but more fine art, medium wise. And it certainly captured my attention, and I appreciated, her abilities. But I remember when I was in high school, I believe it was my sophomore year, and I was in study hall, and I walked into the classroom, and in the back of the classroom were these album cover designs, not professionally released material, but you could tell it was student projects. And rather than go straight to my seat, I kind of went back there and I was checking them out. And I thought they were really cool. It was artistic, but it was different. So I went to the study hall faculty member and I asked her about them. And she said it was her class's work. And she said she taught graphic design 1. And I said, what are you doing there? And she said, we're visually problem solving. And I was like, ooh, that sounds pretty cool. So I didn't have much room in my curriculum, my coursework to take on more classes until that point. But I made a shift my junior year and I took graphic design 1. And I remember doing the work in that class, and it was this rudimentary pencil, scissors, cutting paper, and the weight of the paper and the lettering, which was all done by hand, and color usage and truly visual problem solving. That lit a spark in me. I've had very few moments of pure clarity in my life and career, but I was like, this is it. I knew it with clarity. That was it. So rather than, I was very by proxy grades focused to that point. And I was just like, I'm done with grades. I want to get a portfolio together and go to art school. And, young person, naive mistake that I made. I put all my eggs in one basket, put a portfolio together for the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And that was the only place I applied to. And thankfully I got in. That could have really bit me in the rear.
Yes, for sure.
Wow,
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah. I love that story. I know that you have had a lot of experience and you work with many designers over the years, but I do think that there's 2 types of designers, right? There's designers that they knew they have stories like yours. I have a story like yours. It's I always was creative. My parents are creative. They own video production. And I played with Photoshop and the first time and I was like, oh my gosh, this is life-changing. This is where I see myself. And so I kind of had that moment of this is me. And there's a lot of us out there. And then there's the ones that are career switchers. They take boot camps. They have a history. They have a whole other career. And then they've kind of shifted into this. And so I think it's really interesting to kind of hear how design came into different people's lives and where that passion came from. And so, yeah, I love what you said. I also love that you got to take it in high school. That's awesome. I didn't have that opportunity. I had to wait till college, but you said that your instructor, your teacher was like, what we're doing here is visual problem solving. And that's such a great way to think about design, especially graphic design, product design, UI, UX design. And you like started from the basics, right? You were doing those, like you were literally like writing out letters and solving problems. And so I think that's really, really interesting. And so I guess the question for you is how do you distinguish, or what are your thoughts on like designers that come from a more traditional graphic design background? They had that thing from early on versus maybe more of career switchers that pick it up later in their career.
There's advantages to both scenarios, honestly. One thing I appreciate from the curriculum I had, because, you know, this was a different time. This is when late 90s, early 2000s, when the web as a career was just becoming a thing, right? For designers specifically. So my formal training was in typography and layout and graphic design specifically. Like the Art Institute at that point did not even have like a digital design curriculum. So I remember buying books and I was just hungry to learn. I bought myself books and taught myself to code. And I remember in the lab, one of my lab sessions, like I designed a web page for one of the musicians we were studying in chamber music, classic art school course, chamber music. And I put like a website I designed locally on each one of the computers, and people were like navigating, and it was just like blowing them away, like the hover states of buttons. And I mean, this is a while ago, like I said, and just like the raw digital landscape was a problem to be solved at that point. So I felt like that traditional design training married with that was fascinating to me, absolutely fascinating, because we were figuring out the rules and how we could break them more or less in digital design. So that was cool. But like I said, as I've hired folks along the way on various teams that I've led or organizations I've led, one of the things, we're getting into culture a little bit here, I like to do is I call it the new day one, and I hire folks on I bring them into the team on a Friday instead of a Monday. So there's a kind of a different energy established rather than 5 days of orientation or reading a manual or jumping into work. Like I want to understand them as a human being, as a bespoke individual, rather than a name on a piece of paper. So one of the things we do is we go off site. I ask them to take me to some place that inspires them in the city. Of course, we could do that virtually now as well. But I remember one time a new team member took me by the Museum of Science and Industry, which is about maybe 10 minutes south of Chicago. And we went not there, but like a little bit by the lakefront. And we went there and I said, you know, why are we here? Why does this space inspire you? And they said they were in another field completely. It was banking, and they knew they loved to connect with people and help people solve problems. And they got to the core of that, how that aligned to their values, the crux of helping people solve problems. And they decided to make a career shift over to UX so they could apply those same values and things that were important to them to the UX space. And they went to a boot camp and they did some training via that. And to me, that's brilliant. That's bloody brilliant. You had that moment of clarity. You applied your values and your North Star to a different field, and they were, you know, they did phenomenally well. So I think there's a million different ways to attack it. Everyone has their own unique background story, but those two are pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love how you have like your day one on a Friday out in a place that's meaningful to that person. I think that's a really great way to onboard. And I have many questions. We have many questions I want to focus on about kind of that culture establishing and things like that. But I guess like before we hop in too deep there is this is kind of getting a little into your book. So in Fulfillment, the Designer's Journey, is what was it that made you want to deepen your understanding of a designer's journey or focus on bringing out like the culture in the design space?
I think at this point in my my own journey, my own journey as a designer over the many years that you cited in the intro, I've gotten a bit more clarity and perspective on my own disconnection over the course of my career. Now, I want to focus on that specifically because disconnection affected the way I am connected to my work. And that is important, not just because I want to better my portfolio, which is also great, but I'm more concerned about the folks on the other end of my work, those who would be engaging with my work. And yeah, sometimes, design, it has various levels of impact based on what we're designing. It could be an app icon, it could be a concert poster, it could be a chair, but it also could be an emergency alert system, or it could be something healthcare related. And those have varying levels of intensity and how they touch someone's lives. But design at the end of the day is connection. And you're conveying information, you're conveying an experience, and having that connection severed, I feel, can have dire consequences. Like I said, varying levels of severity based on what we're designing. So fulfillment, to me, I think the book very well could have been called In Connection as much as it is in fulfillment. It's a word, but I think, if fulfillment is the jewel, I feel like there's many facets to that jewel. I think fulfillment is connection. I think design, like I say in the book, is connection made manifest. If it's like something tangible or intangible, or how we're building a team or building a structure, design is problem solving, like we said at the beginning, like my art teacher said 25 years ago. It could be, visual problem solving, what have you. So that perspective on my career about where my disconnection came into play and how I've been able to identify the practices and values where I most thrive. And it's not hokey pseudoscience. Like when you are able to understand what your values are in your personal and professional spheres of existence and make sure there's a unified front there where you're able to leverage them to the benefit of both those spheres of existence, it really creates this harmonious dynamic or energy, let's say, based on whatever environment you're in, personal environment or business environment. So really those accrued learnings, and I've, the material in the book is very well trodden. It's very well beat upon. A lot of it is from my talks that I've given. And whenever I give a talk, I say, I value your feedback. And this is not just me saying that to say it as a designer. Like this is how I grow and I evolve. I value your feedback. And folks have approached me with very candid feedback, which I respect immensely. And it's helped me really perfect and help my material grow to what it is today. So, I'm very proud of it. And I think it's also something that folks can hopefully benefit from quite a bit.
Amazing. Yes. Some things you said that I would love to dive deeper on is you said this clarity kind of came from your own disconnection, which I think is really powerful. And this is something I think any designer, as you grow, as your career grows, as you get further along, and I kind of talk about this a lot, so I'm curious I think you're on kind of the same path, is like the failures that we make are more impactful than maybe the successes, at least from my perspective. So all of those things that you're like, oh, this didn't work, I want to try it again, I want to do something different. Those moments in my life personally, like whether it was like, oh, what do I want to do? Do I want to switch to product design from graphic design, which I did, all of those moments of like, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm just going to test it, I failed, getting back up, trying again, trying something different, were the most invaluable skills I've ever learned is the disconnection that I had. And so my question to you is, how can you help designers kind of figure out what those values are? Like, where are those disconnects happening and how can they like build that harmonious values instead of tools that they use?
Yeah. I appreciate your own story there, because I think to bounce back from or evolve from those points of disconnection takes a strong degree of humility. And I talk about humility. There's an entire chapter about humility as a designer in the book, because when we are always students of our craft, we are always making ourselves available to evolve. And in large part, I'm quoting myself in my own book, which is a little hammy, but I genuinely believe in that. And I think, even beyond design, like researchers approach work and they have to always make themselves students of someone's environment or where they're observing, if it's ethnography, if they're observing someone on site or what have you. You always have to make yourself students and humble at that point so you can learn and evolve and make yourself a part of that person or individual or business's world. So I think that is huge, to leverage humility just as a baseline value. Everyone's values are unique and personal, but I think humility is a baseline value for all of us. almost agnostic. Well, definitely agnostic of profession is huge, but for designers specifically. And to your the first part of your question, how do you identify where those points of disconnection come? There are different frameworks and platforms and methods that folks can use. I like to leverage one called Make Meaningful Work, which I'm very immersed in and invested in. And it effectively is a platform where you are able to identify the practices in which you thrive through the power of storytelling. And in Fulfillment, the designer's journey is very much a storytelling book. But you could take a look at any instance, like when I hire someone on that first day, let's go back to that. My butt is on my chair and I'm greeting that person at the door. If it's in person at the door, if it's online, I want to meet them first thing in the morning. 5-second story. Why do I do that? Because I've been that person before when I walk in and no one is there. Right? I've walked into an organization. My boss decided not to come in until 3 o'clock that day and no one knew who the heck I was or what my role is or where I sit. And it makes you feel small and it makes you feel disoriented and it cuts that energy from signing to that walk into that door and you just feel like garbage. So I want to cut that, right? Because I've been there before. And I could have another meeting on my calendar and my phone could be ringing and I want to make sure everything is as clear as possible for this person coming in. And, I want to show them where the mother's room is or where we can get a cup of coffee or help them get oriented within the space. And I'm able to take a look at that story and extract all those things: empathy, compassion, wanting to genuinely be a leader. And I can look at those aspects from that 5-second story and I can apply that more or less to anything. I can apply that to where can I thrive? If I say I left design and I want to work in another field, like what field might those values apply? Or in my personal life, how can I best have effective, healthy relationships by leveraging those same values and establishing boundaries, So I think it's really a portable, immensely valuable means of maintaining connection agnostic of your environment. So that's one thing I absolutely recommend. Like I said, whatever platform or framework, and framework could be a swear word because they have various levels of intent, but just having a laser focused view of what practices you thrive within and how they align to your values is huge.
Yes, I think that's great. I think something you said that is really powerful for our listeners is our listeners are probably listening because they're designers trying to continue to grow in their career. But a value is like a core belief that you have and that you are good at or want to continue to improve. And that can be applied to all aspects of our lives. Right. And so I think that really keeps us completely aligned in our journey. I have a side question here because I know you recently launched Anomaly. And so I'm the co-founder of the Design Project. And I did so many exercises, workshops, which were my personal values and how they would translate to my business. And I was wondering, did you do something similar? How were you able to take these values and these core beliefs you had and apply them to Anomaly?
Yeah, it's I was excited to read about your journey as well coming into this podcast, which is awesome. So yeah, this will definitely resonate with you. When you build your own thing, you are able to infuse your own values into the DNA of X, whatever it is. If it's a freelance practice, a small business, an agency, what have you. And the curation and respect and treatment of those values as something grows. Like I say, you just want it to be yourself and a partner. If you want to ultimately be a 15 to 20 person agency or what have you, that is where the special sauce comes in to make sure the business has that long lasting livelihood, the way you create, the way you treat one another, the way you treat clients, to make sure those values are in the DNA of everything. And I think, I mentioned the Ben and Jerry's example in the book, how those folks, their values are in everything, in their product, the way they donate, their political beliefs, the way they broadcast themselves in social media. They are just, it's in every fiber of what they do and who they are, which is fabulous. Anomaly was very much built on my values. Anomaly is a Swedish word for, guess what? Anomaly. It just has an I at the end. And Swedish culture had a huge impact on me in one of my design director roles for taking on a role as a VP of design within CVS Health. This design director role was from a Swedish agency. I was tasked with building out the design practice within their North American offices, and Swedish culture just left such a huge impact on me as a human being and as a designer. the egalitarianism, the viewing a person as an individual rather than a worker. Folks stopping in the middle of the day at 2 o'clock to come to a table in the middle of the business and have cake and coffee and not answer the phones. My head was just, as an American employee, my head was just exploding. I'm like, who's going to answer the phone? Like I physically like cannot get out of my chair because I was mentally shackled to my chair. I just couldn't believe I could do those things.
Yes.
So it was an awakening for me, for sure. And I made sure those values are in the DNA of what I'm trying to put together. And I had an experience where I was as a consultant for a tech company, a tech and design company, and a fellow who was my boss at a previous role went to another company, and he said to me, "I want you to come aboard again, and let's do it again. I want you to be a VP of design again and build the organization and hire everybody." And a fantastic compensation package around it. And I had like this needle scratch in a record moment. And this is a statement laced with privilege. I recognize it. And I'm like, I've done that. I've done that already. And I dealt with the political strife of getting there. And it took 5 years of my life to build that team, and it ended up in a really good spot. But like I've been there, and I'm midway through my career, let's say. I'm trying to be kind to my age. And I feel like I can make those decisions at this point. And I told him no, which felt like an affront to the design gods. I told him no. And he said, you know what? I think you're done. I think you're done with the politics side of thing. I think you're ready to do your own thing. And I was like, I think you're right. So everything just kind of aligned. And, as you are, as starting your own business, a completely different set of challenges. The work ebbs and flows. You are always in sales mode. The buck stops with you. And it's a completely different set of challenges, but you're also operating on your own terms. So as someone who is challenged and exhilarated by those kind of like existing within that discomfort, I feel like it's a really strong fit at this point.
Yes. I think that's really great advice that both of us can give to listeners out there. It's like understanding your values, understanding what's important to you, and pivoting based on that. Like, obviously money is a factor. We are all privileged if we get to like take a step back and do our own thing, for sure. But also recognizing that if you had done this, you would have been doing something very similar, and you might not have been able to grow in the capacity that you wanted to. So by going out on your own, you chose to be uncomfortable, to be in a space you didn't know, and push yourself. And I think that goes back to what we were originally talking about, which was like disconnection. Once you have that disconnection, like understanding what it is, how to solve for it, and what to do from there. And a lot of the times it is putting yourself in an uncomfortable position that you don't know if it's going to be success or failure, but that's where you learn and where you grow the most, in my opinion. So
excellent points.
That's great.
Excellent points. And the validation for me was, I've written a couple books. I've given a lot of talks in front of a lot of people, and that's never rattled me. What has rattled me over the course of my 25 years in design was, let's go around the room and introduce each other. Let's start here. And whether there's 2 people on the call or 10 people on the call, every time, if it's a client call, I would be like, should I say my job title? Like, what do I do? Like every time I would stumble and get caught. The first client meeting I had with Anomaly in a room with a client, it just flowed. Let's go around the room and introduce yourselves. And I was comfortable. I wasn't rattled. It just came straight off, and I felt really good about it. And I did a self-check when I got back in my car after that. And I was like, what the heck happened there? Because I'm very self-conscious about let's go around the room and introduce yourself. And I did a self-check, and I'm like, I was existing in my own environment at that point. And I knew I'm very confident in the decisions I made and what I've built. And I could speak about my values very clearly. And there was no political implications there. Should I say something with this person in the room or should not? It was just everything gelled. So that was the validation for me.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's important to recognize those moments too, right? Like, I love that you do self-check-ins. I think that's really powerful. Like, what went well, what didn't go well, and you had that moment of clarity, which is super interesting. And actually, so kind of segueing into, I think this is a concept that you talk about in your book, is your North Star. So I want to dive a little bit deeper on that. Can you can you explain what you mean by that concept? I know you mentioned a little, but I also think it's really relevant to what you were just saying.
Yeah, it's more or less where you're going, and why you're going there, I guess. I think I wrap up the book about saying, we've given you the tools about, where to align to what, where, and why you create. And I think it's just having a clear sense of what that is. And, that takes time. I'm not saying we have those answers straight away. I mean, I did not have that answer on day one. Absolutely. Full candor and transparency. It took me a while to get to. At first, I just wanted to get experience, and I just, I wanted a job. I wanted a design job. And I think at that point, getting experience is great. And then I'm like, do I want to go? Am I an IC? I didn't even know that term at that point, but I'm like, am I rewarded by my hands, or am I more rewarded by helping other folks grow and evolve? So I think those self check-ins come in segments along the way in your career. And I think as long as you're consistently doing that, where I'm going, and I use North Star in the book, but like where I'm going, like what path am I charting? It's just good to like check in with yourself along the way. And like you said, as an anti-disconnection mechanism, I think that is a fantastic way to go about it. And like like I said, when I got in the car after that anomaly meeting, and I'm like, well, why did that just flow this time? And I just sat there and I thought about it for a little bit. So I think it's great. Yes, design is a profession and it's a career and it's a way of putting food on the table. But I think at the same time, when we're mindful of those who are interacting with what we create or how we can operate at our peak, I think we have to be equally mindful of those things as well.
Yeah. What you just said at the end is something you also said kind of at the beginning of our conversation is what we do impacts others. And that's a huge part of UX design, UX thinking, what we need to bring into whatever company we're in, whether we started or not, the UX concept is there. And so I guess my question, kind of goes to company culture is, do you have an example or can you share an instance where design played a pivotal role in shaping the company's culture and making sure that you're understanding those UX principles and applying them to the company you're in?
Yeah, for sure. So when I made the transition from that Swedish agency into that VP of design role, and that was with a healthcare organization that was ultimately acquired by CVS Health, which is a Fortune 5 business.
Yeah.
And I came in there with my Swedish cultural values in place. And this is, a much larger corporation. I'm effectively a cog in a massively complex machine, and as an acquired company, more or less within CVS Health. And I wanted to Design Boy wanted to do things his way. So I wanted to do my onboarding on a Friday instead of a Monday. And that fellow who I mentioned before that who was my boss, who reached out to me later about that second opportunity, he was my boss there. And I was able to say, I want to do it this way, but I want to do this way and it's trackable. I want to make change, but this change is measurable. So whenever you want to make change with an organization, regardless of if you're hierarchically a design leader or if you're a design leader in spirit at any level of any level of your career, it feels good, only moves the needle so much within the business. It feels good and it helps the business because of X, Y, Z. That's where you're actually able to make change. So I said, I'd like to bring folks in on a Friday instead. I want to do my thing where I'm going to welcome them at the door. I want their laptop already there. I'm going to have a card signed by the team there, welcoming them to the organization. We're going to leave at about 1:00 and we're not coming back. There's no work going to be done that day. No billable hours will be logged, and we're going to go around the city. I'm going to ask them to take me someplace that inspires them, but let me do this over 6 months, or let me do this over a year, and let's see how it affects attrition. Let's see how it affects organic marketing. Let's track when people come in and we ask how they found us. Have they been looking about our blog posts about how we're hiring folks? That was all trackable and measurable, and obviously the results were there. And I had my boss, again, C-level, had my back in totality within this large organization. And when I was on the leadership team there with the VPs of the other groups, IT, product, sales, client relations. Um, my boss said, tell these folks what you're doing. Tell them how this level of, I'm going to say design thinking. I don't mean design thinking the practice. I mean applying design to thinking. Tell them how this is working. And they were really intrigued. So they're like, okay, I'm going to do this. I don't know about the inspiration part, but tell me about this part. And it just started to impact hiring across the tech organization, which is what we existed within. It started, influencing its way through the other organizations as well. And folks got very intrigued by that, and it started to work. So I think that's a great example of, people first can be a tagline or on a bumper sticker or in your swag when you get hired. But when you actually see that in practice, whenever you see businesses' values tangibly in actions over words, I think that's a very impactful thing. So it was great to see that happen.
Yes, that was a really good example. I think that is great for like the listeners out there is, I mean, being measurable and actionable, that's like a UX principle, right? Like everything we do needs to have data to back it up. That's how we're able to make our decisions and move forward. And so you being able to apply that directly into this really large company and show the value, they gave you the space to do it, which is first awesome. And then that you actually got to show that value and they saw interest and then it was impacted throughout the company. Like that is an ideal situation of being able to bring some of that thinking in. Were there any people that were not on board with these ideas, and like what was their feedback? What were their questions to you of like, why does this make sense?
No major pushback per se, because I think it was on the other leaders within the organization to take the bits and pieces that work for them the most, right? If it was like cookie cutter, okay, you are taking someone out and asking them how they inspire you, like I think that would be a little more discomfort. But I outlined the activities for the day, but I think the more important takeaway from that is why I was doing it. And it's all those underlying things. I want to show respect. I want to show our values in practice. I want to show I value this person as an individual rather than a name on a piece of paper. Those were the things I wanted more instilled rather than, here's the Justin Dauer way of onboarding. It's not about me. It's not about the way I structure a day. It's the ways they are going to welcome someone into their organization, and ideally had those values carried through from the most micro level interaction on day one through the most macro level on day 500. So those are the more important things to me. And I think if I said, here's the playbook, do it like this, I think I would have gotten a pushback, but that's not the way we rolled it up.
Right. It's interesting. Some of these concepts, like your concept is really simple. It's like, hey, be there for someone that's starting, be there to support them. But like you mentioned as an example, you came up with this concept because there were times in your life starting a career where that didn't happen. And in our minds, we're like, oh my gosh, of course that would never happen. Like, why would someone just let someone walk in and no one knows? But it happens regularly on a daily basis, right? Like, it's just a fact that it happens, even if we think that it's such an easy something to avoid. And so I think that talks a lot about like processes and culture. And I don't know the question I'm asking specifically, but like, I think there's these soft skills and these ways that we should be acting. And a lot of organizations act below that, which I find really fascinating. So maybe the question is to designers out there that are listening, like, how could they go into their organization, or what advice would you have for them to be able to build a better culture, or maybe some questions or things they can be thinking about to talk to management or higher up people?
One of the amazing, I don't mean to sound like a sociopath here, but one of the amazing things from the Great Resignation, or whatever you want to call it at this point, it's been going on 3-4 years now, is designers and folks broadly are not settling. They are not settling for values disconnection. They're not settling for the way organizations speak about values and practices rather than actually put them into play. And I think that's been fantastic. All that market testing, folks finding out what's right for them, what's right for number one. And I think that's absolutely huge. The way I'd like to answer your question is how to find an organization that
Mm.
aligns to your values. If you're currently looking, we talked a bit about if you're there, how to make some impactful, measurable change, hopefully. But when you're looking for your best fit, and my setup for that was that market testing. There's a couple things you could do when you're looking just at a website straight away. Any business's website has gone through the same practice as we as designers go through. When we're designing a website or helping a client, they've gone through IA exercises and prioritization of content. Now, when you look at an organization's website that you might be interested in, like where does about us fall in the navigation? Where does culture fall? When you look at the about us page, is it just like the C-suite, or is it the actual employees that you're seeing there? So how are they representing themselves? How they represent themselves is a very telling thing, if you will. Or is there like in a day in the life culture kind of page, or are they showing how they put their values in action? And then when you're interviewing, any interview is a conversation. It's not an interrogation. So I think coming to the table with questions that are very important to you about how you can thrive. So it's very important to have that sense of values, because then you can help that can help you craft the questions that you're going to come to the table with. How those questions are answered, I think, is huge. Or is it an interrogation versus a conversation? Or are there 10 rounds versus like they're being respectful of your time and they kind of want to get right to it? Those are very, very key things. And I've straight up asked before, can I talk to a former client? Can I talk to a current client? Can I talk to someone who works here now? Can I talk to someone who left? Like how close are they holding their cards to their chest, more or less, and what kind of responses you get? And sometimes they can't because of NDAs and such, but I'm just saying, as designers and researchers or what have you, we have to be aware of our surroundings. We have to be aware of the responses we get. We have to be aware of the environment we exist within. Take those same eyes, that same mindset into any of these situations. Or if you're on site, like, are people looking stressed? Are people like sitting on the couch chatting? Just be aware of your environment and your surrounding. There's a lot of like micro tells that come outside of the like when you're showing a house and everything is staged, right? There's a lot of micro tells around the staging side of things that I think are demonstrative of a good fit or otherwise.
That's great advice. Thank you for taking that question I asked and putting it into that. I think it's really interesting. And I think it's very relevant, especially now. I think there are designers out there looking for jobs, and it is finding that culture fit, and that's huge. And I guess this also kind of brings us back to a different piece in our conversation is like, I think what's really hard about trying to find jobs is like, there's like a validation of getting to the next stage or getting an offer, right? And so how can someone that gets to that point be able to make that difficult decision of like, hey, I made it this far. Should I continue? Or I got offered this job. It's good money. Do I want to take it even though there were red flags? And I think, I don't know how you feel about that or what advice you would give, but I think that's probably something that people thinking about now as they dive deeper into understanding the culture of organizations.
Yeah, there's always a trade-off there is I think when we come back to that notion of self-reflection, not every business is, utopic, as we've discussed. Those are hard to find and take some care to locate. And some, have more faster paced culture, and some things are terrible buzzwords there, but faster paced cultures or business environments, let's say, or they're more demanding of hours. Like if you worked in TV and film, you get the production schedules. Sometimes they work into 2 a.m, and that's just the way that sector is, right? So I think there's gives and takes there in terms of having a clear sense of what you are willing to function with or without when you're taking a role. And another interesting nugget in your question was career evolution and progression, and what is a best fit. And when I think of that, I think of, a lot of folks are driven by what I like to call LinkedIn progression, showing I was a junior, mid, senior, management, just like having that very clear sense of resume-based progression. Again, it's not the worst thing in the world, and that's perfectly fine to exist in that circumstance for many people. But also, I will say, I have managed folks who have been in the same IC caliber role, like art director, no direct reports, tone setting on design for no joke. I had a fellow who in my previous role was in that role for about 30 years, 30, 35 years. Same kind of thing. Brilliant individual. No desire to manage anybody. No desire for title change. And that's fine for him. Like I just said, LinkedIn progression is fine for some people. That was fine for him. So I think having that sense of what is right for me, what will I would come back to fulfillment. What is my most fulfilling career route? Do I need to feel societally or what do I want to say, pressured to have this constant progression up. If management is not my best fit, that's what I'm trying to get to. If having direct reports is not my best fit, so be comfortable with who you are. Be comfortable with what you feel is the most fulfilling thing. You don't have to manage folks. If managing others and helping others grow and evolve is the way you go, that's fantastic. But if that's not the right fit, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay to be an IC or be rewarded by your own hands in motion or how your work is evolving. That's absolutely fantastic as well. So a bit of an ambiguous, rambling point or response to your question, but I think there's some food for thought there.
No, for sure. For sure. I think it's definitely, I like what you said about like the LinkedIn progression, and that's like our resume, right? And I think that we talked a lot about like today and the Great Resignation and what you should be looking for culture fit wise. And I think you touched on something really powerful was like, today it's honestly acceptable to do whatever you want, however you want to do it. Like you and I, we went out on our own, we made our own agencies, or maybe you become a design influencer, like, or you sell courses. Like there's so many directions you can take design that you don't have to fit into this box that was previously like defined for us as designers. So you don't always have to be moving up. You don't have to be a manager if you don't want to be a manager. And a lot of people, especially designers, I think this is a very generalized statement, but designers are maybe more introverts, and they really like just being on their computer, working with their hands, designing. And if that's you, own it. Find that as your value and figure out where you can go from there. So I think your answer was definitely inspiring, and it like probed me on that thought as well. So yeah, that was great. So
awesome.
So I have like a final kind of question for you about the future. And you've been in this industry for a while. You talked about .com boom, like when you kind of started building websites, and like, I mean, you obviously know where this question is going, but where do you see design going? Where do you see designers fitting in the future? Obviously, the buzzword is AI. Is it going to take over? Now what we can do with Firefly, Adobe, like, what's your assumption or direction?
Yeah, it's, I'm going to come back to a point I made previously, and that is always being students of our craft to just see where things go and evolve. And I think when we have that approach, and the Firefly integration within the Adobe suite is just mind blowing. What I've seen videos of and the little I've tinkered with, that's going to change workflows and the way we create work. And I think we're just obviously scratching the surface here. So going in it with a humble lens and just saying, less feeling threatened and more feeling how this can enhance the way I'm going to work. Maybe remove some of my fulfillment from my work because I like doing it. I like getting in there and using the rubber stamp tool. And now this is going to kind of eliminate that. So maybe I want to try something over here. I don't know. I think it's kind of a fun and, leveraging my own lens of vulnerability and candor. It's a little scary. It is a little scary. It's brand new, and it's okay to be scared, and it's okay to exist within that discomfort. But just kind of going along for the ride and seeing how this can enhance things, or maybe you want to make a shift. I think if I gave you a fixed answer and I said, I think design is going exactly here or there, like Apple, just came out yesterday with that headset, and my first reaction is, who's going to use that? And I'm like, oh, it's kind of cool. And then I'm like, oh, it's too expensive, but it's isolating. So I don't know. Do we have to learn spatial design now, or be aware of that kind of those Iron Man mask displays? Yeah, we should probably see what's going on with that. But maybe that's a new career path option. Maybe that's something I'm not interested in. So I'm rambling a little bit, but I think just going with the flow in a way, not feeling overly threatened by things evolving, because things are evolving quickly now. I think just how Chat GPT has evolved from version 1 to now is just nuts. It's just nuts. So I think we just have to kind of go along for the ride, more or less. And those self checks that we've mentioned along the way, I think will, to tie another point in, be our North Star and help us figure out how we want to chart our own path. But it's a really exciting time to see where things are going.
Yes. I definitely second everything you said. I think that what I liked is we brought back to a lot of points in the conversation, but I think the overall message is like, you as a designer, like, know your values, know your core beliefs, which you mentioned a lot, and take those core beliefs and then be open to everything else, because that's what's powerful. It's so exciting. I feel like designers that are coming in now, maybe new, fresh designers doing boot camps, like, this is such a fascinating time in the design space. And like, yeah, I was talking to my partner about the new Apple goggles. I don't know if they're called goggles.
I'm not sure. They look like goggles.
Whatever they're called. I think it's like, we were saying like, oh, we're going to look back at this conversation in like 15 years. Remember, we were like, who's going to wear that? And then we're like, oh, remember like 20 years ago, no one had cell phones and now they're locked to us. Like, we're all going to be potentially walking around with these goggles on our face, right? Like, embracing that and trying to get into that now and experiment with it is going to be a really powerful tool for you designers out there. So yes, I think what you said is awesome. And I agree with everything. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Justin, for being here. It was super interesting to dive a little bit more here about your career. I'm really excited for your book. We'll definitely make sure to tag it in the comments. Comes out June 27th. So be on the lookout for his book and Fulfillment and the Designer's Journey. Thank you so much again. And we definitely will continue this conversation at a later date. I want to follow along on your journey.
Awesome. Thanks, Dianne. I appreciate it.